Welcome once again to Castrol Activ Champions, and what a delight to be able to talk about someone who gave everybody so much joy everywhere he played. We are talking today about the inimitable, the one and only Brian Lara. You first knew that Lara was going to be special when you talked about people who came back from that 1989 tour of the West Indies, and they said there was this young kid who just turned up. No one knew anything about him, and once he started batting, they said, oops, hang on, let's take a close look at him. And then we saw Lara in 92 at the World Cup, that first game against Pakistan. He got runs, but it wasn't until 1993 that he went to Sydney. Also remember the place where Tendulkar had that breakout century, their careers were to run parallel for such a long time. But Brian Lara captivated Australian cricket at the Sydney Cricket Ground like few others had in that innings of 277. It was his first Test 100, and sometime later when it came to naming his daughter, he named her Sydney after that 277 that he scored there. His next 100 was 167, and his next 100 in his 16th Test match, he went past the greatest of them all, Sir Garfield Sobers. It's interesting that Sir Gary's first Test 100 was his 365. It came in his 17th Test. In his 16th, Brian Lara had broken the record, and there were always similarities in the way they played. They were talked about, the tag of genius that was associated with them, and Brian Lara was now just starting to tell the world who he was. And then he went and played for Warwickshire. And there was a game when he was dropped early on, and the wicketkeeper apparently said out of disgust, he said, he's probably going to score 100. And then Michael Holding tells that story so beautifully, doesn't he? And then he got 100, and then another, and then another, and then another, and then another. Who would have thought that 500 runs would be made? Brian Lara made 501. He was in the middle of the purple patch that cricketers and batsmen can only dream about. Then 1995, he made 765 runs in that Test series against England, and everyone went, wow, what a player he is. 96, he comes to play the World Cup and knocks South Africa out in the quarterfinal with a century of such brilliance and such incandescence that it's even talked about today. Then 1999, across a career, if you have to say, tell me about Brian Lara, there's two things that you will talk about. One of those was that 99 series against Australia. 51 all out in one of the Test matches. Remember, what does he do? He comes back and just peels off a 213 to level the series. And then the 100 that will always be his as long as cricket is talked about. 311 to get to win in the last innings. Lara is batting with Courtney Walsh, and Courtney Walsh, he just made you laugh when he was batting, but he was not a batsman. There was a magician at one end, and well, there was just Courtney Walsh at the other, and that 153 not out is one of the great Test match innings. It was a period when West Indies cricket was in turmoil, when West Indies were not quite getting the replacements for the greats. There was all this talk about West Indies just sliding down into nothingness. It was in this period that, with his brilliance, Brian Lara was protecting that West Indies batting lineup, much like Castrol Activ's Actibonds protect your bike engine, whether running or off. There was to be a second defining series for Brian Lara, the batsman. The West Indies went to Sri Lanka in 2001. There's Murali in his prime. They lost the series 3-0, but no one remembers that. Everybody remembers that Brian Lara made 688 runs in 3 Test matches. And really, you've got to repeat those numbers. 688 runs in 3 Test matches. He made 53% of all the runs that the West Indies made. It seemed as if Murali was running through everybody and hitting a brick wall at the other end. And that rivalry, that contest was one for the ages. And it just seemed that Brian Lara knew exactly what Muralitharan was going to bowl. He swept him against the turn, he dropped back and he cut, he charged down and hit him with the spin through the offside. And somebody asked him, it was almost as if you knew what Murali was going to bowl to you. And he said, yes, I knew exactly what he was going to bowl. And they said, how do you know? He said, because I was making him bowl that. And I've heard that about a lot of batsmen, that they actually played around with bowlers, with their mind, with their thoughts, with their length, and got them to bowl where they thought they should bowl. And it's still talked about. You go around in the cricket circuit and you say Lara, and they say one of the greatest players of spin. Remember how he played Murali in 2001. Others were getting all the big scores as well. In October 2003, Matthew Hayden made 380 against Zimbabwe, and suddenly Lara didn't have the record. He didn't like it. It didn't take him too long. In April 2004, he went back to Antigua and he made 400 runs in a test innings against England. Why could Brian Lara make all these big scores? The 400s, the 500s, the 200s and 300s. He made so many big scores. In fact, he made 19 of his 34 hundreds were more than 150, and that is because he scored very quickly. You think of Lara and you think of stroke play, and yet he had this uncanny ability to play in bursts. He'd recognize match situations for about half an hour, 45 minutes. He'd bat as if he was never going to score a run, and then suddenly he'd realize that the tide was turning, and there would Brian Lara go, scoring at better than run a ball. But because he had this concentration, because he had this ability to score very quickly, he was able to score the 2, 3, 4 and even the 500s.
Well, I captained against many great players, but he was the one that could embarrass the captain. And he embarrassed me on that occasion where he got 400, because every time I manoeuvred the field, every time I brought mid-on up or mid-off up, he just hit the ball over the top. Every time we went to an offside field, he'd just walk across his stumps and manoeuvre the ball on the onside. Every time we went short and kind of into his body, he'd just lean back and smack it through the offside. He just completely took the mick out of my captaincy, because I tried everything.
Brian Lara played one-day cricket too, of course, and he played it well enough to score 10,000 runs. When you're a champion, anything you put your hands into, you become very good at. But he made that 100 against South Africa in '96, started the 2003 World Cup. There we were all in South Africa, everyone talking about South Africa, and just Lara goes and hits another 100. But to me, Brian Lara will always be this traditional cricketer dressed in whites against a red ball and just having a lot of fun. He said when he retired, and it's one of the great lines, isn't it? He said when he retired, "Did I entertain?" And I think the world said a resounding yes. Brian Lara, you did entertain. Lara played the game in the spirit of the game always, asking the fielder if the catch was clean, walking away. Lara stood for many things that cricket stands for, and to that extent, he protected not just West Indies cricket, but was a symbol of strength for world cricket as well. Protected it much like Castrol Activ's Actibonds protect your bike engine, whether it's running or off. Eventually, Brian Lara played 131 tests, 11,953 runs. He made 34 hundreds and averaged 52.88. When you look at the pantheon of the great West Indies batsmen, Everton Weekes, Gary Sobers, Viv Richards, Brian Lara, he's right up there among the very best. We're delighted to feature him this week in Castrol Activ Champions.